Good morning and welcome to this webinar organized by Bergen Global, Jostein Institute, Center for Law and Transformation, and the Rafto Foundation for Human Rights. We gather here on the UN Human Rights Day, and we are here to focus on human rights cities and explain what they are and what do they mean. And at the UN Human Rights Day, we are celebrating the UN Human Rights Declaration. One of the architects of the declaration was Eleanor Roosevelt. And she said once that, where after all do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. And human rights, we often think about international institutions, governments, or issues far, far away. But in recent years, we've seen a movement of human rights cities, making human rights local. And in 2018, Bergen became the first human rights city in Norway through a unanimous decision in the city council. And by that, Bergen has joined over 40 cities around the world and about 10 cities in Europe that have declared themselves as human rights cities. Today, we will be focusing on what does this mean to be a human rights city? And does it make an impact? Does it make any difference that a city declares itself a human rights city? And is there any standard to become a human rights city, or can anyone define it as they themselves want to? To explore these issues, I'm very glad that we have quite a distinguished comparative panel with us today. We have both representatives from the city of Bergen and also 3 other European human rights cities: Graz in Austria, Utrecht in the Netherlands, and Lund in Sweden. And so we'll both hear from these representatives, and we'll also have a discussion with them about human rights and their cities and their potential. And we want to involve you in that. So you can send in your questions throughout this throughout the webinar, and I'll get it on the screen here, and we'll ask the panelists in the second half of this session. We'll also be quite efficient today. We'll end at 10 sharp, so you can go on with your other business today. And just to say a bit about the human rights city concept. While there is no very exact definition, it is human rights city is referring to often communities where everyone from ordinary citizens to policymakers and local officials actively strive to protect and improve the lives of the city inhabitants. And that they do that with an explicit reference to the UN Human Rights Declaration, the declaration that we are celebrating today on 10th of December. Who can become a human rights city? In many ways, anyone can decide and self-declare. But there are also some networks. There is an international network of human rights cities. There is also a European network of human rights cities. And there are also efforts ongoing to streamline and standardize what it means to be a human rights city and what it should entail. And the question also is, why do we have them? And there is, and we will be exploring that today. But the human rights cities, in a way, is part of a trend we've seen for the last decade, where cities are moving forward. We've seen it in terms of shelter cities, with regards to refugees, on climate change and climate adaptation, and also on human rights, where cities lead the way, often when out of a feeling where governments and international institutions are failing. So we'll explore these tendencies a bit more today. And to kick this off, I'm very glad that we have Lubna Jaffry, who is the Commissioner for Housing, Work and Social Affairs in the city government of Bergen. Now, Lubna has also been part of the city council in Bergen from 2015 to 2019, and from 1999 to 2003. She's been an advisor to the government, and she's also been a state secretary in the Ministry of Culture. And before becoming commissioner, he was a senior advisor in the Directorate for Integration and Diversity, so based here in Bergen. And so, Lubna, we're very glad to have you with us today. And to start this, can you say what is special about the Bergen context?
Well, I think coming from Bergen, it's just, we always think we are special, and being a human rights city, I think Bergen has always been a city that has looked outwards, not inwards. So I think when Norway wasn't an independent country, when the king was in Denmark, I think the city of Bergen looked to Denmark to see how they were perceiving their lives. And also Bergen is also an Hanseatic city. And also the cooperation with the Hanseatic cities has also developed Bergen to being a quite international city. And also how Bergen looks today is due to a lot of the international influence we have had. So I think that the special context of Bergen is that we've always been aware of our international engagements. And I think also that it was natural for Bergen to, of course, we have the Rafto Foundation in Bergen as well. So your human rights are very inclined in everything we do. So I think it was, if a city should be a human rights city in Norway, it wasn't surprisingly that it was Bergen that chose to be it.
And so Bergen became a human rights city in 2018. It was a unanimous decision by the city council. And what has changed since Bergen became a human rights city?
Now, that's a very good question. I think, it's just been 2 years. I don't think that, I think we have, the thing that has changed is that we now discuss and everything we do about politics and policies, the human rights aspect is a big part of it. And of course, we have had a big discussion about human rights now during the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. So I think it's a much more awareness about, is this incoherent with the human rights? Are we doing this right? But I don't think we have done huge differences in the policies we have here in the city. I think this is just, we have the same policies as we had before 2018. But of course, human rights, they are absolute in a way. But at the same time, human rights for you could be something else than it is for me, even though we have the Human Rights Declaration that points out what is a human right and what is not a human right. So I think the awareness is the main issue that have changed here in Bergen towards the human rights.
At the annual conference of human rights cities hosted by the city government of Gwangju in South Korea this year, the mayor of Bergen was speaking, and together with mayors from human rights cities around the world. Why is it important for Bergen to join other human rights cities like this and be part of an international network of human rights cities?
I think it's important to learn from each other what other cities are doing and how they use the Human Rights Declaration in their work, both in the public, in the when they're making policies and when they're doing politics, but also in the civil society. How is the human rights used to make a better life for people, because that is the reason we have the Human Rights Declaration. We want people to have a good life, to have a safe life. And I think to exchange experiences is very important for us. And not doing this in a, lonesome path. We have to have a discussion with other countries. But also I think that being in Norway, being a part of Scandinavia, we have a welfare state, which has a lot of universal rights. And I think that is very different, of course, from other countries that have other versions of the state and how they give different rights to their inhabitants. So I think it's important that we show how we do the work, and we learn from other cities how they do their work, considering human rights.
Are there any areas where you think we have challenges? Or...
Oh, yes, of course. And I see it in my field of work every day. For instance, dignity is a very important question considering the human rights. Every individual, every person's right to have a life full of dignity. In Bergen, for instance, we have people that struggle with drugs. And that is a difficult debate, because also people who have drug issues, they need housing. And that's a huge debate in Bergen. Where are they going to live? And everyone agrees in Bergen that, of course, they have the right to have housing, but just not in my area, And people are very concerned. How is that going to affect me? So in a struggle to give everyone dignity, some people will feel that their dignity is taken away from them. So that is just an example that it is difficult. Also, considering migration questions, Bergen has always been a city that has said, we will have people who are seeking asylum to come here and live with us. But making them an equal part of the society is also a difficult issue. Racism, it's difficult. People experience racism in Bergen. Of course they do. So I think we have a great deal of length to go to perceive what we see as human rights for everyone. So I think it's important that we have a debate about what is the human rights it is, and also in the city council, also in the political scene of Bergen, that we have a debate and discussion that is ongoing on how do we perceive the human declarations in the city of Bergen.
Thanks, and we'll get back to you, but now we'll also hear from some of the other European human rights cities, and we will start with Graz in Austria. That was the first. It was the first city that became a human rights city in Europe, and it would be and to share their experiences, we have Gerd Oberleitner, who is a professor of international law and UNESCO chair in human rights and human security at the University of Graz. He is director of the European Training and Research Center for Human Rights and Democracy at the University of Graz, which supports the Human Rights City of Graz. Gerd, welcome, and I'm glad you can join us this morning here in Bergen from your office in Graz. Could you give us a short intro about the how Graz became a human rights city and what kind of impact this made?
Thank you, Jostein, and thank you to the organizers of this event for bringing together a range of human rights cities to discuss this important and emerging topic and to cover this dynamic field. Thank you to Bergen Global and the Center on Law and Social Transformation for being active, and thank you also for Bergen to join the family of human rights cities. We are glad to see and hear and work with you. I'm speaking to you from the city of Graz in Austria. And as Jostein has mentioned, I'm the director of Human Rights Academic Institution, which supports the Human Rights City of Graz, which next year will celebrate its 20th year. We are proud to have been the first European city that has followed the lead of a number of other cities in other regions to become a human rights city and to pave the way in Europe for the emergence of this idea. When you ask why did we become a human rights city and how did we become a human rights city, I think this has many fathers and mothers in a way. It's It was years ago both a bottom-up and a top-down approach. It was bottom-up in the sense that a number of interested academics and researchers joined forces with an existing civil society and NGOs in the city to take advantage of the idea of human rights cities, which back then was very much floated as an emerging trend. But it was also top-down because it needed a convinced and engaged mayor who had the support of the federal government to dare to go forward with this idea and bring it to the city council. This resulted in a declaration which formed the Human Rights City in 2001 by the city council, which was supported by all political parties at the time and continues to be supported as the form of self-proclamation that you have mentioned as a human rights city. This declaration, short as it is, I think is interesting in 4 ways for the way it integrates human rights into the city. It allows the city administration to be, as the declaration says, to be guided by international principles of human rights, which is very much a human rights-based approach, as you know it elsewhere, in the form that international human rights and human rights law forms the basis or should form the basis of the city's activities. In practice, this means much of what the city does follows the letter and spirit of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that you have already mentioned. And a lot of work is also structured around the ideas of human rights, which means it follows the idea of interdependent, interrelated, indivisible human rights, but also allows for the kind of clustering on civil, political, socioeconomic, cultural rights. It takes note of international human rights law, even though this cannot be implemented directly in the city, of course. And it also takes note of the many self-commitments that cities have given themselves over time when it comes to human rights and human rights matters. Secondly, it does what a human rights-based approach does. It identifies rights holders and duty bearers, which gives, in terms of the duty bearers, of course, obligations to the city administration and to all the public services. And it also allows to have a geographical idea of a human rights city. All those living within the space should be benefiting from the human rights city. Thirdly, it's broader in the sense that human rights should be the leitmotif of a society that comes together as a community. And fourthly, it's strongly and clearly rooted in human rights education, because it sees human rights education as the precondition for everything that unfolds. And the whole human rights city ideas, as you will remember, comes from the human rights education field in a way. What does it mean in practice? What can you see looking back 20 years? I think it has led, on the one hand, to a range of institutional and legal and administrative developments within the city. I'm just mentioning the 2 most important ones because this is also very much how the city operates, really. One, the city has given itself a Human Rights Council composed of 25 members coming from all areas of society, politics, administration, academia, civil society, which is the backbone of the whole human rights cities idea, which is mandated to take stock in a regular way of the dynamic human rights development. It is meant to adopt recommendations for the city administration to go forward. And it is also, and that is in a way the second backbone, it is tasked with preparing an annual human rights report, which very much gives structure to the whole development of human rights cities. And these human rights reports are usually developed in a participatory way with reaching out to civil society and all stakeholders in the city to have their input, to go through the structure of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and deal with all areas of city administration and city services in a structured way, to analyze the human rights issues emerging, to identify specific problems of a current nature. The last report of 2020, which came out yesterday, incidentally, was devoted to COVID-19 and the city, and to see how a city can deal with this situation. I'm sure we'll come back to that in the discussion, perhaps. And it's also a means in which some kind of monitoring or evaluation can be done on a biannual basis to see if and how the city is able or has been able to follow up the recommendations in this field. So I think these are perhaps the two structural or institutional outcomes that the city works with very strongly. It's an attempt to understand human rights as a dynamic field which needs consistent development over the years. And it's also interesting to read the reports because you see the kind of development that the city is undertaking in different fields. Some of it relates to, as Lubna has mentioned, classic problems that human rights law have to deal with everywhere, such as discrimination. But others are very specific. The use of public spaces in the human rights-based approach. The access to housing, of course, is one of the core problems. Access to health, access to asylum migration assistance services, the role of children, the role of young people, and other areas. We will be celebrating 20 years of Human Rights City next year. One of the outcomes also of the activities was that we are proud to have been able to establish last year, or this year rather, the International Center for Human Rights at the local and regional levels under the auspices of UNESCO in the city of Graz, which is meant to be an institution that will also reach out to other human rights cities in other regions and put forward the idea on human rights implementation on the local level and increasingly also on the regional level. I think this is also a matter for discussion, perhaps what the difference between regional and local may be as an important element. And so we will see what the next year will bring. 2-3 words on the future, perhaps. I mean, the issues being identified for future activities really in our city are to move towards some kind of human rights budgeting and to integrate human rights more closely into this. The link to implementing the SDGs and the role of SDGs for cities in conjunction with human rights, and also the role of child rights as an emerging field, the participation of children and youth on the local level in the human rights city. I think I'll leave it with that, with a brief introduction. Thank you again. And I think it's over to other experiences from other human rights cities. Thank you, Jostein.
Many thanks, Gerd, and sharing the experiences from Graz. Graz became a human rights city in 2000. In 2010, Utrecht in the Netherlands became a human rights city. And I'm very glad that we have Sakkers with us. He is educated as a sociologist and I think also as a futurologist. He has formerly been heading the city government's Department of International Relations, and he's working there as a strategist in implementing human rights in the local at the municipal level, and he is also an active member of the European network of human rights cities. We're very glad to have you with us, Hans. Will you share with us briefly the experiences from Utrecht?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Bergen. Yeah, well, the story of Utrecht was, well, perhaps a coincidence, because we got a phone call from the Fundamental Rights Agency in, I think, 2009 or 2010. And with the question, well, we have a project in 6 European countries and 6 cities, and we like to work on a joint up governance and how to make fundamental rights, human rights more local, and how to support the cooperation between the national and the local level. And we joined the project, and part of the project was in doing a kind of evaluation, an assessment of our own policies, and we did so in 10 policy areas. And we tried to find policy areas that were important on the right side of the political spectrum and on the left side. So from the beginning, we had a kind of strategy that human rights should be on the agenda, but not politicizing things by human rights. And we try to work and to get used to slogans for human rights are always there for everyone, etc. And well, this was the beginning, and we did some training internally in the municipality and the organization, together with Amnesty, with the university, and so it was. And we had luck that our mayor was a former judge, and we had a deputy mayor was educated as a human rights expert. So we had on the political level a lot of support. On the level of the administration and the civil servants and the higher management, it was very difficult to get over a kind of skepticism. Why do you use this kind? Why do we need to use this kind of strategies with this kind of bigger frames? And there's also a period, the last 10 years, of this decentralization, and that meant in the Dutch situation that we got on, especially on the social themes, more responsibility on local level instead of provincial and on national level. So the modus was, well, we know better. We are close to the people, so why should we relate and align to higher level frameworks? That's exactly the other way around. Well, but in our case, something special happened in 2012. That was the opening of the National Rights Institute. It's based in Utrecht, and the Queen was there, and Mrs. Pillay, the High Commissioner at that time, came to Utrecht, and she opened with 1,000 people listening. Well, it's very nice to be in Utrecht, the first human rights city in the Netherlands. Of course, it's not a formal title, as Jostein told us before, but it was kind of that so many people were listening to this kind of informal way of recognizing that we were working on this project in the FRA context. It was changed the setting, because until then we try to keep it a secret, but it was also, we were convinced that human rights cities are not a marketing thing. So you always have to be aware that you're not good enough. You always have to working on better policies and to improve situations, and you never can sell. Perhaps you can say we want to become a human rights city, or we are doing better next year. So for us, it became, so on the one hand, it was difficult in the administration. On the other side, politically, it was very well, it became more and more popular, and it also survived the elections and the next generation of politicians. And it became more concrete in that we also declared, the council declared themselves a children's rights city, a shelter city. And the whole focus changed to the civic society and facilitating all kinds of groups and NGOs and social entrepreneurs, and to create a social network inspired by human rights, and culture played an important role in this. The focus was in I think the last, this period also on things like migration, homelessness, LGBTI. And there we had some example that human rights becoming a human rights city was really making a difference. So we had a big tension with the national government on homelessness for undocumented people living on street, and they didn't allow us to take care about them. So we went finally together with others to the European Human Rights Court and won this case against the national government, claiming the right based on human rights to take care about people. So there was from the national level and also the Association of Dutch Municipalities not that much support, because, well, the other municipalities say, well, we're already doing all kind of policies. We don't need this terminology, this concept. And the national government made a change from human rights to citizenship. And that had in the Dutch context and quite different meaning, because human rights are always there for everyone, and citizens, you have to do your best, and it's also about responsibilities of yourself. So we more and more, we also try to become related in the international network, because we need the support of exchange and having ideas how to work on human rights locally. Yeah, we're looking all the time for other cities joining this movement and helping each other and supporting each other. So for us, it's great to see that Bergen is also joining the family, and so I hope to work on a lot of issues together the coming years. So thank you very much for doing this and organizing this today. Yeah.
Many thanks, Hans. I think also you said something about, you know, Human Rights City is not a branding exercise. It's a process, and it's never going to be perfect. And I think there's something we can also pick up on later. Do also remember that you can ask your questions in the chat function, and after our next speaker, we will open up for those questions. In 2018, Lund became the first city in Sweden to become a human rights city, and we're very glad to have with us Ulrika Dagård to share their experiences. Ulrika Dagård is a project manager and strategist at the City Council office in the city of Lund. Her main responsibilities are to work with human rights and local democracy issues. In total, she has 10 years of experience in working with democracy development, business development, community engagement, communication, and human rights, both at a strategic and operational level in Swedish cities and municipalities. Ulrika.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. I want to share my screen with you because I was thinking of showing a PowerPoint presentation, and I hope it will work. Yes, it should be working now, yeah. I hope. Yeah. Good. Everything is set. Thank you for having me. And as in the presentation, I have worked and I'm still working as a project manager and strategist at the City Council office in the city of Lund. And the City Council appointed Lund as a human rights city in 2018. And then Lund became the first human rights city in Sweden, but also in Scandinavia. But we are very excited that Bergen has joined us as well in this little small community in Scandinavia so far. Well, the main reason, it was actually a political decision. It was our mayor and also a member of the executive committee who worked very closely to the Raoul Wallenberg Institute that is located in Lund. And so it was entirely actually a political decision that Lund should become a human rights city. And I was also part of this process then. And the City Council appointed Lund as a human rights city in August 2018. And the idea and the main reason for Lund to become a human rights city was that we were and still are convinced that societal issues such as inclusion, sustainability, gender equality, environmental issues, accessibility, good governance, and delivery of public services are best handled at a local level in comparison to regional, national, and international level. And what we have done then since 2018, it was actually me and a colleague. We are working at Social Sustainable Development Department, when we got the assignment to create a systematic and structured work with human rights in Lund, since we were appointed as the human rights cities, we started by reading and discussing a lot of analysis about the social conditions in Lund, and to be able to understand which were the most important challenges in the city. And also we cooperated a lot with Lund's university in the process, also with the Raoul Wallenberg Institution, the civil societies organization, and also with internal administrations and departments. And we primarily focused on human rights, public health, and segregation when we started this work to build a structure, a systematic work with human rights. And from start, we had actually 2 different assignments, and that was to create one regulatory document for public health and also for human rights. But during our work, during the analysis, we actually decided to merge the city's work with public health and human rights into one document, a program for social sustainability, and using the SDGs as a comprehensive work then. So now the City Council adopted the program in August this year, and the program's validity is 10 years, but we will be revised twice during the period, depending on what needs arise. And the program is based on our initial analysis and the investigation we conducted. And we were a group of civil servants from the city that completed the program together. And here we have a kind of structure of our program and our system of working with human rights and public health. So we have principles, we have a policy that are built on the SDGs, and we have 6 principles, and they include that we should comply with laws and regulations. We want to have a great knowledge in the area. We try to collaborate, also that we should have a lot of knowledge and that we should promote innovation. We try to work transparently and with the aim to constantly improve and develop, of course. And hopefully we can be a role model in this context as well. And the program for social sustainability have 6 main goals, and that is democracy, education, healthy habits, work and employment, housing, and the ambient environment, and equality as well. So what we are going to do now is to try to implement the program. That is our main goal the next coming 2 years. And we also want to create a system to be able to follow up our work then with social sustainability, human rights, public health. And of course, carry out activities connected to the program that hopefully will make a change. And also test the human right-based approach in some units and departments in the city. So this is what we have done so far, and we have only started this journey. And of course, we try to collaborate as much as possible. And also we have a lot to learn and want to have more knowledge how actually to implement human rights and to be able to work successfully with social sustainability. So thank you.
That presentation and overview from Lund. And thanks to all of you for sharing your experiences with being human rights cities from 2000 to until today. And just now we will have an open discussion here. You can post your questions online. I have a few questions myself for the panel here, and Lubna here, and our friends from across Europe. And one question to all of you, you can see, is how human rights are the responsibility of the state and the government, and so we would often look for, you know, that it's the state that is responsible for fulfilling its inhabitants' human rights. What difference does it make that we make this local? What sort of added value is it that we have, and are there particular human rights obligations that are especially relevant for local governments to attend to? Do you have any experience of that from your side? Anyone wants to comment on that? Lubna, would you like to go?
I can begin. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because I also think that being the 4 cities we are here today, we have different political systems and different issues that the government attend to and what local governments attend to. I think, for instance, I think it was Utrecht that had the example from when the state had to comply due to the human rights. And I think, for instance, here in Bergen, we have the same thing for illegal immigrants, for instance. They have the right to health, you know, they can have free health services. We also do housing for people who come from countries like Romania, Bulgaria, who just earn their income is just by working on the streets. So we do have these things. And I know that the national government in Norway, they think that, for instance, giving health services to illegal immigrants, that is actually breaking the law. So that is an example that Bergen has said, no, we are going to treat everyone the equal in Bergen. If you live in Bergen, if you are staying in Bergen, you have the same rights. You have the same human rights concerning, for instance, health. So I think that if you have a political system, obviously I'm the only political person here now, I'm the politician, but if you have different systems and if you have different issues that you think is very important, then of course the local government and the city that has said they want to be a human rights city is very important. And also that I think Bergen are in a sense marching in front of some of the issues that are national as well.
Yeah, okay, that's one example from here. Do you have examples from other cities about where you think that the local government in particular is important for the implementation of human rights versus the national government?
Perhaps just a comment on that. It's correct, of course, that the legal question of city competencies is a very difficult one, and it's very diverse because all of the cities reside in different legal frameworks. So whether or not there is legal competencies to act or not to act is a question. But I think what we've realized is that this is not so important at the end of the day. What we see, and this is perhaps a bit of more of an abstract take on it, is that in the human rights cities, first of all, you allow a different kind of discourse of public matters when you use this kind of human rights-based approach. And I think this is what we see in our city, that many of the debates that you have on local politics, on questions of justice and fairness, are being framed within a human rights framework, which gives a very distinct and different spin to many of the discussions. I mentioned participation in public spaces and use of public spaces. It suddenly changes when you use the kind of human rights framework for this discursive shift. And the second point is perhaps that whether or not you have these legal competencies, there is some kind of new agency for cities and for local communities in different frameworks. Lubna has given a fantastic example of a city suddenly confronting the central government and finding this kind of identity and self-perception, which is suddenly rooted in a firm human rights commitment and which gives a certain strength to the argument. I think this is two shifts that you see occurring, regardless of the kind of specific legal questions and legal issues at stake?
There is one question here from the audience regarding, well, strengthening human rights implementation locally can be costly. It would be interesting to hear from the various human rights cities how important human rights budgeting in the municipalities are to strengthen the human rights work. Anyone have any experiences with that?
Well, I can answer that because we don't have any budget, especially for working with human rights, not at all. But our hope, it will be like that when we are going to implement our program. The administrations, they are very aware of this, and also, so it will be a matter for their internal businesses, administrations. But I'm not sure, probably it would help to have some sort of appointed kind of budget to working with human rights, and just to kind of promote the concept in the city, to work with communication and to spread the message that we are a human rights city. But we haven't raised that question yet, but I think that will be the case further on. I don't know what experiences other cities have in that matter.
Any other have experiences with human rights budgeting?
Well, we don't have a budget for human rights issues in Bergen, but I think if you go through the budget of the city, you will find a lot of different posts on the budget that are human rights related. For instance, the example of the health services, they are human rights related, but they're not like in an own budget. And also I think it is how you think upon human rights are more important. When you have an issue you're discussing in the municipality or in the city council, you have to have with you, is this breaching or is this increasing the human rights issues? For instance, when we're discussing child services, you know, the child's right to have a freedom from domestic violence, and also the parents, you know, chance and law to have the privacy in their own home. So there are, you know, different types of discussion you have to have. It's not only about the budget, it's also about the issues, I think.
Other experiences with that?
No, we don't have human rights budgeting. I also cannot imagine that it will happen. I think that also the same is happening with SDGs, and I think there are not that many good examples worldwide that cities really reorganize the whole internal structure on this kind of international frames. But I think the more important thing is that we have, your former question is about how can it have impact on transforming local policies. And there you see that, and especially in the tension with national governments, you see many examples that it really make a difference. As, for example, in the Polish cities on LGBTI policies, the LGBTI-free zones, and that in smaller towns supported by the national government, and that the bigger cities say, well, that is not what we want to have happen. Or the digital rights and the San Francisco that say, well, face recognition in public space, that is not human rights proof. Or all the European cities working on refugees and welcoming refugees instead of well, what their national government want them to do. Also, for example, what's happening in cities on well, what it's now stopped by Corona, but the Fridays for Future is the environmental rights people claiming in cities is also part of a city movement worldwide. And or Black Lives Matter in the US is a US city movement against the national government and people standing up against not human rights proof realities and policies.
There is a question here from one of the audience asking to what being part of a human rights city community brings value added in terms of shared methodologies, tools, exchange of experiences, etc. Maybe Hans, you've been active in the European network and the international network. What's the added value of being part of a network of cities?
Well, in our case, there is, on the national level, there is only one other city, and Middelburg, and sometimes Amsterdam. It depends on the political composition. But we have 400 other municipalities that are not working on human rights in an explicit way. Of course, all municipalities do something that is contributing to human rights, but when you don't call it that way, you don't have a mutual understanding in how it, or helping each other, how it could work. So, and this is complex because we are at Utrecht are not that far as Graz and Lund in the administrative translation of human rights in a more formal way. For us, it's more a cultural movement. We're talking about human rights culture supporting in the city, and then hoping that it's all kind of issues talking back to the municipality that gives permanent pressure on well, improving policies. But it's in but this kind of different strategies, we need each other to talk about, and to make next steps, and to have the examples of each other, to get the concrete inspiration to do better.
I have there's a question also from the audience here. What would you suggest for a city that would possibly like to join the human rights cities in the future, but the national government does not care about human rights on a national level? How can the discussion go forward in an environment like this, and also with a reference to Budapest in Hungary? Would anyone like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very good question, but I think also we see also in Europe, referring to Hungary, that we have issues considering human rights. We have Poland, we have different countries and different cities, of course, around Europe. But I think cities are very important voice in the national debate. And I think if cities decide to go forward and do something about the human rights issues and becoming a human rights city, despite that the national government is inclining to do what the human rights are saying, I think that would be very important, and it would be a voice in the debate, because as far as I can see, both in Poland and in Hungary, it is not just one side. There are different sides, two sides that are disagreeing with each other. So to empower that voice would be very important. But it would probably be, I can just imagine, it would be a difficult position to be in.
Any other comments on that?
Just to remind you that indeed the mayors of Bratislava, Budapest, Prague, and Warsaw have come together last year, signing what they call the Pact of Free Cities. So that is precisely the answer, that this is really happening, that the agency of cities and that self-perception do make a difference. And Budapest and others have already, and the mayors of these cities have already answered the question in the affirmative and said, yes, we can, and yes, we do.
We also have a question here from the audience about, do you prioritize some human rights over others in the work of human rights cities? And I also, I would maybe ask Graz, you've now been human rights city for 20 years. And we have also, I also see that, Gerd, you've been joined now by your colleague, Klaus Saal. So maybe with your experience now for 20 years, do you face situations where you prioritize some human rights over others?
So I think this would be for my colleague Klaus to answer, because he has presented the last human rights report, I think yesterday, which comprises all the rights and gives an answer also to the questions of priorities or not priorities.
Klaus, welcome.
Yes, welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation and changing my name. So Gerd was doubled by me. So sorry, Gerd. Yes, I mean, this is an interesting question as well. Of course, there are several focuses, but in Graz, we try to harmonize and we try to generalize and address all human rights for all. So we very strictly try not to avoid hierarchies of rights, but several situations call for focuses, like for a political reason now, we have a strong focus on children's rights, but not instead of others. So, but there is a focus. We had a focus, of course, also on refugees' rights and things like that. So this depends on the one hand on the political climate and on the public and media climate as well, and on situations which are brought up by the Human Rights Advisory Council for the city, like Gerd was telling before about the public space. There was a big issue about the public space, which was triggered by bagging bans and discussions. But the field was much broader. So there was for several years the public space and the conflicts of use of public space was in the center of the attention. But in general, we try to have all human rights, and in the human rights report of the city Gerd was referring to, we go along the Universal Declaration.
Many thanks. And I see that we are moving towards the end of our time here, but I would just like to have one final question here for Lubna here with me here in Bergen, because we are living in the midst of a pandemic. We're sitting here in the midst of the pandemic. You are joining us on Zoom. The audience is online, and me and Lubna is 2 meters apart. And with the lockdowns, with all the measures that have been taken quickly by national and local governments across Europe and across the world, it is also a stress test for human rights. And Lubna, in Bergen, you know, we've had quite drastic measures taken on short notice, and there's been also a lot of debate about if they are in line with human rights. Being a human rights city, has that been part of the discussion?
Of course it has.
Yeah.
And it's been, I think it's also been a huge discussion throughout Europe in the different measures we have had to go through. It's been a debate in, you know, the privacy of your own home, how many people are allowed to be in your home, for instance. It's a huge debate. But also we have to remember that the human rights also have not just, you know, the individual rights, they're also the collective rights. For instance, the freedom of illness is also a very basic right that we have, and also which is a very, it's an important thing for the government, local governments and national governments to keep people safe. So, and also I think it's also a timeline. How long are you doing the different, restrictions in the city? Is it for a week? Is it for 2 weeks? Is it for a month? Or is it for 6 months? Is a part of the debate. But of course, human rights have been a huge debate in the public area, but also in the midst of the politics when we are deciding which measures we have having here in Bergen. It's not been easy. It's been challenging, and I've learned a lot of it. So, but it's also been a debate between the different legal parts of, the people who are studying human rights. Some disagree and some agree that this is a part of the human rights. So I think that after the pandemic, I think we will take with us what we have learned during the pandemic about how we are violating or emphasizing on human rights.
And I think on that note, we will end for today. And I think what we're in the midst of here with the pandemic also shows what I think what Hans was also referring to, that you know, being human rights city, it's not you know, a stage where you end up and everything is perfect. It's about being in a process. It's allowing citizens and politicians and government officials to deal with challenging issues, but doing that with human rights at the core of it and making that explicit. I would like to thank all of our panelists this morning, from Lubna here from Bergen, our panelists from Graz, Lund and Utrecht for being with us. And we very much appreciate that we can join in this way and in this community digitally. We hope to see you again physically at some point in the not too distant future. And I also would like to say that we are, as we are on Human Rights Day, Bergen there will be other things happening online from Bergen today. Being a human rights city also means that Bergen is a fair trade city. The municipality is having a seminar later today on the fair trade city and on business and human rights. This meeting here is also part of a series that has come out of being a human rights city, where we, together with Bergen Global, Christian Michelsen Institute, Center for Law Transform, and Rafto Foundation, are focusing on different issues that relates to being a human rights city. And this is also how we try to involve and mobilize citizens of Bergen in being human rights city. And then finally, if you're watching this from Bergen, this year Bergen is celebrating the 950-year anniversary. This evening, you can join digitally in that celebration from your home, and you can go online and find out more information about that. So thank you to you all. Thank you for following, and wish you all the best for this day and for the Human Rights Day. Thank you.